November 7, 1944, Morville-Lévis, France. The pencil moved across the page of Alois Friedrich Hartmann's field journal, recording words that contradicted everything the Wehrmacht had been taught about racial hierarchy. These Negro tankers fight with precision we did not expect. Their coordination exceeds many German units I have witnessed. Either our intelligence has failed us completely, or we have been deliberately misled about the capabilities of these soldiers. Through his binoculars, he had just witnessed something that shattered 3 years of Nazi racial propaganda. Black American tankers maneuvering Sherman tanks with tactical sophistication that matched or exceeded veteran Wehrmacht panzer crews. An armored thrust that broke through German defensive positions in less than 4 hours. In Germany, the party leadership had assured the Wehrmacht that African soldiers were primitives incapable of modern warfare, unable to operate complex machinery. Yet here, in what Nazi ideology had described as America's weakest racial element, black soldiers commanded 30-ton steel machines with deadly efficiency. 712 men of the 761st Tank Battalion had just entered combat for the first time. Not in a supporting role, not in a limited capacity, but as the spearhead of Patton's Third Army offensive into northeastern France. The entire German defensive line had prepared to face what they believed would be an easy victory against inferior troops. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound challenge to Nazi racial theory since the war began. Systematic demolition of white supremacist ideology through the sheer demonstration of black military excellence. The mathematics of ideological collapse were being written not in propaganda leaflets but in combat statistics that would soon shatter every assumption. Wehrmacht soldiers carried about race, capability, and the nature of military prowess. The journey to this moment had begun on April 1, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated as part of an experiment the United States Army didn't fully believe in. American military doctrine in 1942 held that black soldiers were unsuitable for combat roles. Decades of institutional racism had relegated African Americans to labor battalions, mess duties, and service positions. The creation of the 761st represented a grudging concession to political pressure from black newspapers and civil rights organizations, not a genuine commitment to integrated warfare. Among the men who reported to Camp Claiborne was 23-year-old Ruben Rivers, born in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, and raised in Hotulka. Half Cherokee, half black, Rivers had worked on his family farm and then for the railway before his draft notice arrived in January 1942. His service record would note an unusual combination of mechanical aptitude and natural leadership. Ability also arriving was Leonard Smith from New York, William McBurney from Pennsylvania, and Preston McNeil from Texas. These men represented every corner of black America, brought together by war, and by a system that segregated them even as it demanded their service. The battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, was white, one of the few white officers who genuinely believed in his men's capabilities. Bates understood something that most of the Army hierarchy refused to accept. Given proper training and equipment, black soldiers would prove equal to any troops in the world. His challenge was overcoming not enemy forces, but his own military's prejudices. The training regime Bates implemented was deliberately brutal. The 761st trained harder and longer than equivalent white units. They had to. Every mistake would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. Every failure would confirm the prejudices of skeptical superior officers. The pressure was immense, but it forged bonds stronger than steel. The men learned to operate the M5 Stuart light tank at Camp Claiborne. The Stuart mounted a 37mm gun and 3 30-caliber machine guns. It was fast, reaching 36 Saumep, but lightly armored and vulnerable. The tankers practiced maneuvers in the Louisiana heat, learning to coordinate movement, communication, and fire control. They learned gunnery, how to identify targets at range and engage them accurately while moving. They learned maintenance, how to repair tracks, replace road wheels, service engines under field conditions. They learned radio procedure, the precise language that would coordinate tanks across a battlefield. The training was exhausting. Tank interiors in Louisiana. Summer reached 120° F. Crews practiced until coordination became instinct. Driver, gunner, loader, and commander had to function as a single organism. A tank commander's order had to be executed instantly. A gunner's aim had to be precise despite the vehicle's movement. A loader had to feed shells into the gun without pause. A driver had to maneuver through terrain while monitoring engine performance and fuel consumption. They excelled. By August 1942, when the battalion moved to Camp Livingston for large-scale maneuvers, their proficiency ratings matched those of veteran white armored units. Observers noted their discipline, their mechanical skill, their tactical awareness. In mock battles against other units, they performed admirably. Their maintenance records were exemplary. Their gunnery scores were high. By every objective measure, they were ready for combat. But excellence brought no deployment orders. While white tank battalions shipped to North Africa, Italy, and eventually France, the 761st remained stateside. The pattern became clear. The army was willing to train black tankers, but unwilling to commit them to combat. The official reasons varied. Some officers claimed there were not enough black support personnel to sustain a black tank battalion in combat. Others argued that white infantry would not accept black tank support. Still, others simply stated that this was an experiment that needed more observation before field deployment. The real reason was simpler. The army did not believe black soldiers could fight effectively. This belief, rooted in racial prejudice rather than evidence, kept the 761st in training while the war raged overseas. Month after month, the 760 trained. In April 1943, they participated in Third Army maneuvers at Camp Polk. These were large-scale exercises involving thousands of troops, simulating combat conditions across hundreds of square miles of terrain. Again, they performed admirably. Again, they received no orders. The frustration was corrosive. These were men who had volunteered or been drafted to fight fascism, confined to an endless training cycle because of the color of their skin. The irony was not lost on them. They were preparing to fight Nazi racial ideology while experiencing American racial prejudice. The bitter paradox deepened during their time at Fort Hood, Texas. Beginning in September 1943, the 761st was upgraded to M4 Sherman medium tanks. The Sherman mounted a 75mm main gun, later upgraded to 76mm. It featured improved armor, better crew protection, and the firepower to engage German armor effectively. The tank weighed approximately 30 tons and required a 5-man crew. The Sherman was the workhorse of American armored forces, produced in greater numbers than any other American tank during the war. The men threw themselves into mastering the new equipment. The Sherman was more complex than the Stuart. Larger, heavier, more powerful. It demanded different handling. Crews learned to manage its wider turning radius, its greater fuel consumption, its more sophisticated fire control systems. They practiced firing the main gun, coordinating with infantry, executing complex tactical maneuvers. They became proficient quickly. Their enthusiasm for finally receiving combat-capable equipment was evident in every training report. But Fort Hood sat in the heart of Jim Crow, Texas. The contradiction between their mission and their treatment became unbearable. They were training to fight for freedom and democracy while experiencing neither. Off-duty, the black soldiers faced segregated facilities everywhere. Separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate waiting rooms. Restaurants refused to serve them. Businesses turned them away. Local police harassed them. White civilians treated them with contempt. On base, conditions were only marginally better. Black soldiers and white soldiers trained separately, ate separately, slept in separate barracks. Even the post-exchange and movie theater were segregated. Black soldiers who had earned the right to wear the uniform of the United States Army were denied basic dignity because of their skin color. Off-duty, the black soldiers faced segregated facilities, hostile locals, and overt discrimination. One incident crystallized the contradiction. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, an exceptional athlete who would later break baseball's color barrier, refused to move to the back of a bus on the Fort Hood base in July 1944. His battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bates, supported him, but senior officers intervened, transferred Robinson to another unit, and court-martialed him. Robinson was eventually acquitted, but too late to deploy with the 760. The message was clear. Black soldiers, no matter how capable, would be treated as second-class citizens. The deployment order finally came in June 1944. After 1 to 2 years of training, the 761st Tank Battalion was alerted for overseas movement. The men could hardly believe it. The war in Europe had been raging for nearly 5 years. D-Day had occurred on June 6th. Allied forces were establishing themselves in France. The need for armored units was desperate. Finally, the 761st would get their chance to prove what they had been insisting all along. They were ready. This engine gave the Sherman better acceleration and hill-climbing ability than earlier models. The improved power plant made the 30-ton tank more responsive in combat, allowing it to maneuver quickly and take advantage of terrain. These improvements mattered. In tank combat, speed and firepower often meant the difference between survival and death. They trained briefly on British soil, familiarizing themselves with the upgraded vehicles, conducting gunnery practice, running tactical exercises. The training was compressed, intense. They had only weeks to master the new equipment before shipping to France. British training areas in southern England echoed with the sound of tank engines and gunfire as American units prepared for combat. The 761st trained alongside white American units and British armored formations. Some white American soldiers expressed surprise at seeing black tankers. Some British soldiers, less affected by American racial attitudes, treated them simply as fellow soldiers. Then they shipped to France. The English Channel crossing was rough. Tank crews, many of whom had never been to sea before their Atlantic voyage, struggled with seasickness as landing craft pitched and rolled in Channel waters. But they made it. On October 10, 1944, they came ashore at Omaha Beach 4 months after D-Day. The 5-chapter DD beachhead was secure, but the remnants of battle still littered the sand, destroyed equipment, shattered fortifications, and the ghostly atmosphere of ground paid for in blood. The 761st moved quickly inland, traveling by rail and road toward the front lines. On October 28, 1944, they reached their assembly area near the French-German border. General George Patton, commander of 3rd Army, had specifically requested the 761st for his push toward the Siegfried Line. Patton was known for his aggressive armored warfare tactics and his controversial personality. He was also known for his complicated views on race. He had served with Buffalo Soldiers early in his career and respected their fighting ability. Yet he also harbored the prejudices common to his generation and social class. When Patton addressed the 761st on October 28th, his speech was characteristically blunt. "Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you were not good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I do not care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Do not let them down, and damn you, do not let me down." The speech was vintage Patton, mixing profanity, motivation, and acknowledgement of the racial dynamics at play. The men of the 761st understood the subtext. They were on trial. Their performance would be judged not just as soldiers, but as representatives of their entire race. The pressure was immense, but they had trained for this moment for 30 months. On November 7, 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion entered combat. Their first objective was the German H-held town of Morville-l'Evêque in northeastern France. The town sat astride a key road, a junction that the Germans had fortified. Previous American attacks had failed to dislodge the defenders. The 761st was attached to the 26th Infantry Division and ordered to break the stalemate. Captain John Long of B Company led the assault. Long was a no-nonsense officer from Detroit who had earned his men's respect through competence and courage. Behind him, Sergeant Roy King commanded the lead Sherman tank. The attack began at dawn. As King's tank entered Morville-l'Evêque, a German soldier armed with a Panzerfaust, an anti-tank rocket launcher, fired from a building. The shaped charge struck the Sherman's flank, disabling the tank and wounding 2 crew members. The situation was critical. The lead tank was immobilized, blocking the narrow street. German defenders were converging on the position. King and his crew dragged the wounded men to cover behind the tank. Then, using small arms and the tank's remaining operational weapons, they killed the Panzerfaust, a gunner, and the crew of a nearby German anti-tank gun. The rest of B Company pushed into the town. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers encountered a German roadblock, a felled tree reinforced with mines blocking the advance. German mortar and small arms fire pinned down the accompanying infantry. The entire attack threatened to bog down. Without hesitation, Rivers dismounted from his tank. Under direct fire, he attached a tow cable to the roadblock and climbed back into his Sherman. His tank dragged the obstacle clear, allowing the column to advance and the infantry to break free from their exposed position. For this action, Rivers would later receive the Silver Star. By the end of the day, November 7th, the 761st had captured Morville-Levick. The Germans had defended stubbornly, but the Black Panthers, as the battalion had nicknamed themselves after their unit insignia, had prevailed. The cost was significant. Sergeant Roy King died of his wounds. Other casualties mounted, but the 761st had proven they could fight. More importantly, they had proven they could win. German prisoners taken at Morville-Levick revealed something unexpected: confusion. Wehrmacht officers had been told that black American soldiers were poorly trained, poorly led, and would break under pressure. Instead, they had encountered a well-coordinated armored infantry team that maneuvered with precision and fought with determination. One captured German officer compared Sergeant King's conduct to that of a Russian tank crew under similar circumstances, acknowledging the tactical competence displayed. The 761st pushed forward. On November 8th, they fought at Vickers. On November 9th, they assaulted Château-Salins after a 4-hour battle. On November 10th, they captured Deur. Each engagement reinforced the same pattern. The Black Panthers fought effectively, adapted to changing battlefield conditions, and achieved their objectives. At Vic-sur-Seille, they encountered German defensive positions that had repelled previous attacks. The town sat on elevated ground, giving defenders clear fields of fire. German anti-tank guns covered the approach roads. Machine gun positions dominated key intersections. The 761st coordinated with infantry, using smoke to obscure German observation, suppressing defensive positions with tank fire, while infantry advanced under cover. They took the town with minimal casualties through superior tactics and coordination. At Château-Salins, they faced a more determined defense. German troops had fortified stone buildings, creating strong points that dominated the town center. Tank main guns proved effective against these positions, reducing them methodically, while infantry cleared surrounding structures. The 4-hour battle demonstrated the battalion's growing combat effectiveness. They were learning, adapting, improving with each engagement. The men themselves were surprised by how well they performed under fire. Years of training had prepared them technically, but combat revealed character. Fear was universal, but they functioned despite it. The sounds of battle, the smell of cordite, the sight of casualties, all the sensory overload of combat became manageable through training and leadership. Tank commanders made decisions calmly under fire. Crews executed orders despite danger. The battalion functioned as it had been designed to function. Sergeant Warren Cressy became legendary for his courage. When his Sherman was knocked out by a German anti-tank gun, Cressy jumped out, commandeered a machine gun on a nearby half-track, and used it to eliminate the enemy crew. Then he climbed onto another tank and continued fighting. His actions earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. Cressy's combat record over the entire campaign was extraordinary. He fought at the front continuously, demonstrating tactical skill and personal courage that earned respect from everyone who witnessed it. Tank commanders who served with him recalled his calm under fire, his ability to make quick tactical decisions, his willingness to expose himself to danger to accomplish the mission. These qualities, repeated across the battalion by dozens of men, defined the unit's character. The 761st was not just one or two exceptional individuals. It was an entire battalion of trained, motivated, capable soldiers who performed their duties under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Every tank crew functioned effectively. Every platoon executed orders professionally. The battalion as a whole achieved its objectives repeatedly against determined opposition. This collective excellence made the unit's achievement significant. It proved that black soldiers in general, not just a few exceptional individuals, could perform as well as any troops in combat. But the most remarkable story of the 761st's early combat belonged to Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers. On November 16th, Rivers was leading a company's advance toward Gibling when his Sherman struck a mine at a railroad crossing. The explosion tore through the tank's belly armor and sent shrapnel ripping through the crew compartment. Rivers took the worst of it. Metal fragments slashed his leg from knee to thigh, cutting down to the bone. The wound was catastrophic, requiring immediate evacuation. Captain David Williams, the company commander, reached Rivers' position with a medic. They carried morphine to dull the pain before evacuation. Williams later recalled the conversation. "Ruben, you are going back. You have got $1 million wound. This is your ticket home." Rivers refused. He would not accept morphine because he said it would cloud his judgment. He would not accept evacuation because his men needed him. The German guns concentrated their fire on the two exposed American tanks. Armor-piercing rounds struck Rivers Sherman repeatedly. One penetrated the turret. The tank exploded. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers died instantly. 2 other crew members were killed. The survivors were wounded. Rivers had fought for 3 days with a wound that should have killed him on day 1. His leadership and sacrifice had enabled a company to capture 2 heavily defended towns and inflict significant casualties on German forces. For his actions from November 16th to 19th, Rivers would eventually receive the Medal of Honor, though not until January 1997, 53 years after his death. The 761st Tank Battalion continued fighting. There was no time to process grief. The war demanded constant forward motion. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the West. The Battle of the Bulge caught Allied forces by surprise, creating a dangerous salient in American lines and threatening to reach the port of Antwerp. The 761st was rushed north to help contain the German breakthrough. They were attached to the 87th Infantry Division and thrown into the fight for the Belgian town of Tillet. The movement north was chaotic. Allied forces were scrambling to respond to the poem. Surprise German offensive. Roads were clogged with retreating units, refugees, and supply columns. The 761st moved through this chaos, reaching their assembly area on January 6, 1945. They went into action immediately. The battle for Tillet would prove to be one of the fiercest engagements the Black Panthers fought. German SS Panzer troops defended the town with fanatical determination. These were elite units, experienced soldiers who had fought on the Eastern Front and knew how to defend against armor. They had prepared Tillet carefully, positioning anti-tank guns to cover approach routes, mining roads, fortifying buildings. They were determined to hold. Winter weather added another layer of misery. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow accumulated to several feet in places. Visibility was often reduced to meters by blowing snow. The cold was brutal. Tank engines struggled to start. Mechanical systems froze. Ammunition had to be warmed before loading, or it would jam. Crews wore every layer of clothing available, but still suffered from the cold. The Sherman's narrow tracks struggled for traction on frozen ground. Tanks slipped and slid on ice. Drivers fought to maintain control on slopes. The narrow tracks distributed the tank's 30-ton weight over less surface area than wider tracks would have, reducing grip on ice and snow. Movement that would have been simple in summer became treacherous in winter conditions. During the Till operation, the 761st encountered something new: psychological warfare directed specifically at them as black soldiers. German radio broadcasts delivered by American-born propagandist Mildred Gillars, known as Axis Sally, jammed American communications channels. "Good morning, Negro soldiers of the 761st. I am sorry that you will die today in Tillet. Our fight is not with the Negroes in America, and your fight is not with us. Your fellow Negroes are rioting in Cleveland. Your commander, Captain Williams, is leading you to death and destruction. He is white and not one of you. Your battalion commander, Major George, is also white and not one of you. Leave your tanks now and return home to Cleveland, where you are needed and you will not be killed." The broadcast was accompanied by music from Louis Armstrong, specifically the song "I Cannot Give You Anything But Love." Baby. The psychological operation was sophisticated, designed to exploit racial tensions and convince black soldiers that they were fighting a white man's war. It failed completely. The men of the 760 first understood exactly what they were fighting for, not just against Nazi Germany, but against the very racial ideology that Axis Sally's broadcast represented. Tank Commander Frank Cochrane's response radioed to his company became legendary. "They have hit me 3 times, but I am still giving them hell." The 760 first captured Tillet after days of brutal close-quarters fighting. German defenders were shocked when they surrendered and discovered that black soldiers had defeated them. Many Wehrmacht soldiers had internalized Nazi propaganda so completely that encountering skilled black tankers produced cognitive dissonance. How could an inferior race defeat superior German troops? German prisoners captured by the 760 first often displayed visible confusion and fear. One prisoner at Tillet asked, "What are you doing here?" "This is a white man's war." The answer, obvious to everyone except true believers in racial theory, was that Nazi racial ideology was simply wrong. Nazi propaganda about black soldiers being inferior was extensively documented and widespread. The regime had conducted propaganda campaigns depicting black people as subhuman since the 1920s, long before the war began. These campaigns served multiple purposes. They reinforced Nazi racial theories at home. They prepared German soldiers to view their enemies as inferior. They attempted to divide Allied forces by exploiting racial tensions. The regime had spent years building these beliefs. Hitler's Mein Kampf, written in 1925 and 1926, contained explicit references to contamination of the white race through contact with black people. The book argued that racial mixing would lead to the decline of civilization. These ideas were not fringe beliefs, but central Nazi doctrine taught in schools, preached in propaganda, enforced through law. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935, primarily known for targeting Jews, also applied to black people in Germany. People of African descent were classified as racially alien. They faced legal discrimination, social ostracism, and eventually violent persecution. Approximately 500 Afro-Germans, people with one or more African ancestors living in Germany, were forcibly sterilized under Nazi racial hygiene programs between 1937 and 1945. The goal was to prevent what Nazis called racial contamination. During the war, the German military distributed propaganda leaflets to black American soldiers in November 1944, attempting to convince them they were fighting for a nation that oppressed them. These leaflets, examples of which are preserved in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum collection, depicted scenes of lynching and discrimination in America. They asked black soldiers why they were fighting for a country that treated them as second-class citizens. The psychological operation was sophisticated, but ultimately ineffective, because it underestimated black soldiers' understanding of what they were fighting against. Nazi cartoons depicted black soldiers as primitives, incapable of modern warfare. German propaganda magazines published illustrations showing black American troops as savage, subhuman figures who threatened civilization. These images drew on centuries of racist stereotypes amplified by Nazi ideology. Wehrmacht soldiers were exposed to this propaganda throughout their training and service. Many internalized it completely. The Black Horror on the Rhine propaganda campaign had portrayed African soldiers in the French army during World War I as savages who committed atrocities against German civilians. Though these accusations were largely fabricated, they were widely believed in Germany and formed part of the narrative German soldiers carried into World War II. Wehrmacht training materials reinforced these beliefs, preparing German soldiers to face what they were told would be inferior opponents. German military intelligence assessments